What if people say, well, you could just not choose the roll at the coffee shop in the morning. You could have just gone for, I don't know, a salad or something.
Yeah.
It's a choice you're making, Johann.
Yeah,
Just make better choices.
So this was completely the voice in my head. I remember another one of my friends, when I was at dinner and I was doing this, I was talking through everything I'd been learning, and I was talking about, what you got to weigh here, I thought, was the risks of obesity, which are really disturbing when you learn about them. I was actually surprised. We all know obesity is not good for your health, but I was actually stunned when you look at the evidence about how bad obesity is for you in relation to not just diabetes, but cancer, dementia, across the board. We can come back to that. So I was like, well, you've got to weigh these risks of obesity against the risks of these drugs. And I learned that there are 12 significant risks associated with these drugs. And he said, what are you talking about? You haven't got to weigh those risks at all. There's a third option. Go on a diet, exercise, right? And he said, I've seen you do it. You've done it plenty of times, right? Do that. And of course I had this voice in my head. I thought I was cheating. And I thought, well, why am I not doing that, right? And I really began to get an insight into this when I went to interview an amazing person called Professor Tracy Mann, who's in Minneapolis, where I met her, who's done some of the most important research on diet ever. I met her, I interviewed her in a place called Isles Bun, which is a cinnamon bun shop, famous cinnamon bun shop in Minneapolis. And when I arrived, the guy on the door said, have you ever been here before? And I said, no. And he said, oh, we'll give you a free cinnamon bun then. He gave me this 2,000 calorie massive cinnamon bun that sat there the whole time we were talking about diets. And Professor Mann, she began to research this in the year 2000. And she wanted to figure out, how much do diets work, right? Are they effective? And at that time, the science was very clear. Diets are really effective. If you go on a diet, you will lose weight, right? But she's looking at all these studies, it's almost 24,000 studies, and she noticed, as part of this it's called a meta-analysis, and she discovered something a bit weird, which is most of these studies, the overwhelming majority, would follow people who were on a diet for 3 months. So you exercise your willpower, you go on a diet for 3 months, you lose a load of weight, and then they just stopped. And the implication was you stay at that lower rate forever. She'd be like, I know quite a lot of people who are not in that position. That doesn't happen to them. So she looked in more detail and discovered there were 24 studies that had followed dieters, not just over this short period, but for 2 years and in a handful of cases, 5 years. And when you look at the longer picture, the picture is really different. After 2 years, the average person on a diet has lost 2 pounds in weight, right? So it's not nothing, but it's pretty close to nothing, right? It's extraordinarily low. So what we know from the research on dieting is there's a very small number of people, around 10% of people, who really do lose huge amounts of weight on diets and keep it off. We all know people like that. I've got someone in my family like that, right? But for the vast majority of people, it doesn't work. And I remember saying to Professor Mann and loads of other scientists who've looked at this, well, how can that be? Because we know, you only have to know the laws of physics to know, if you consume fewer calories than you burn, obviously you will lose weight. To dispute that, you have to dispute the laws of physics, right? So how can it be that these people are dieting, but they're not losing weight? And Professor Mann and other people explained to me something that's sort of missing in this picture that I think really helps us to understand it and is actually important for understanding these drugs, I think. So a lot of the scientists explained that there are biological changes that happen as you gain weight, which make it harder for you to find your way back in a way that you can sustain. So in the 60s and 70s, there was this theory about weight that was almost universally accepted. It's called set point theory. It sounds a bit complex, but it's pretty simple. If you think about your temperature, your body temperature, right? Your body wants you to be at the temperature you and me are at right now, right? And if our temperature goes higher than that, if we get a fever or if we go to the Sahara Desert, our body will work really hard involuntarily to bring us down. It'll make us sweat, it'll make us really uncomfortable. And again, if your temperature goes below the temperature we're currently at, your body will start to shiver. Again, it'll make you really crave heat, right? So your body has a set level at which it keeps your temperature, and it works extremely hard to keep you in that zone for your whole life. And it was thought for a long time that your weight was a bit like that when you're born, or possibly even in the womb, you have a biological set point for your weight that remains the same throughout your life. And you can go a bit higher or a bit lower, but basically you're fixed there. But then the obesity crisis happened starting in the late 70s, early 80s. There's a huge weight rise in such a large part of the population. And it looked like, set point theory is just wrong, right? That can't be correct, because if it was true, then you couldn't possibly have this. But then Professor Lowe at Drexel and other places and other people discovered what is really happening, in my view. I think they produced very compelling evidence for this. As you gain weight, your body's set point rises, right? So let's say my body wanted me to be 18% body fat. As I get to 30% body fat, my body will then fight very hard to keep me at that higher level, right? Which seems really weird at first. Why would that be? So if you let's say you gained 3 stone, right? And then you tried to lose weight. We'd have to think of a hypothetical. Robert De Niro for the movie Raging Bull gained, 3 or 4 stone, right? And then tried to cut back. But what you'd find was your metabolism would massively slow down. So you would have to burn far more to get the same number of calories as you do now. You would crave far more sweet and salty foods. You would have lower energy, so you would find it harder to exercise. So your set point has risen and it's trying to keep you there. And I remember saying to loads of scientists, well, that just seems bizarre. Why would evolution endow us with that? That's such a maladaptation, right? Why would it be? And they explained to me, well, you have to think about the circumstances where we evolved. In the circumstances where humans evolved, and in fact, every human circumstance pretty much until like 100 years ago, there was never a situation where you would have completely abundant calories. In fact, hyperabundant calories for your whole life. You'd have far more calories around you than you could ever possibly eat. That never happened. So evolution didn't prepare us with good instincts for that. What you did have, what was a big risk, was famine, right? There was a big risk that at some point in your life, food would run out and you would be in real trouble. And in a famine, the fattest person at the start is going to be the last man standing, right? Timothy Chalamet will die in week 1 of a famine, and John Candy will still be alive at the end of it. Although it's not a great example because John Candy has died, but you get the point, right? So actually, that's why our evolution prepared us that, if you gain weight, fight to hold it, because sooner or later you're going to have to lose it in a famine anyway. So we evolve with this instinct that when we gain weight, we experience these biological changes that make it harder to go back. It's not impossible. Willpower is a real thing. Some people can do it. But when you try, you are fighting against your own biology. You're also fighting against your psychology and your environment for different reasons we can explore. So it's not that dieting doesn't work, but we've got to be honest. At any given time, 17% of people are on a diet. We've really tried that route, right? We've had 40 years of relentlessly promoting dieting or diet and exercise as the only solutions. And we've gotten fatter and fatter and fatter. So there's something missing in that picture. I think it's partly set point theory. It's also important for the drugs, because some people argue, like the guy I mentioned before in relation to the brain, Professor Aurelio Galli, some of them argue that what the drug may be doing is actually resetting your biological set point, lowering the kind of temperature at which your body tries to keep your weight. It's bringing your set point down so that you don't get those effects like the metabolism slowing and all the other things that kick in when you try to lose weight.
I think on average, and this might not be accurate, but I think on average we live more stressful lives than we once did as well. And I wonder the relationship that our more stressful, more frantic, more busy, notification-filled, social media-driven, screen time lives are having on our relationship with food. And if there's a relationship there at all. More
100%.
More kids have ADHD now than ever. Cortisol level seems to be skyrocketing, and it seems there's a relationship between stress and appetite, which is acting as a gravitational force against our willpower.
No, you're totally right. And this is, when I go through the 12 risks of the drugs in the book, this is one that I really worried about, one that played out for me. So I noticed I had this weird thing. About 6 months into taking the drug, I had this realization. So I was losing a lot of weight, right? I lost a huge amount of weight. I lost 3 stone.
3 stone in what period of time?
From now to when I started, so just over a year.
And how quick was that weight loss, just out of interest, before we move on?
Pretty straight linear line downwards from the start. But I had this strange sensation. I had my friend Danielle was pregnant at the time. I kept bumping into her, and it was like we were on opposite trajectories. Like she was swelling and I was shrinking. I remember walking away from her once and thinking, this is really weird. I'm getting what I want. Why don't I feel better about this? Right? I didn't actually feel that much better for quite a long time, for about 6 months. Thinking, why is that?
So what do you mean by better?
I felt quite muted in my emotions. I definitely wasn't depressed, but I felt a little bit dulled. I thought, this is strange. I thought, well, maybe it's just other things going on in my life. You never know when it's just an individual. But lots of people are reporting this. Most people are very happy when they take drugs, but there's a significant minority. And so I started looking at exactly this question, the psychology of eating. And it turns out there's kind of there's scientific evidence for 5 reasons why we eat. And obviously the first and most important one is sustenance, right? I would have thought, if you'd asked me a year ago, why do you eat? I would have said, well, the main reason is to sustain my body. But here I am eating so much less than my body is sustained. So all those other calories I was consuming were doing something else, right? And one of the reasons we eat, another one is pleasure, which we've talked about. But another reason why people eat is comfort, right? People get a tremendous amount of comfort out of food, particularly overeating can be very comforting. We know this partly because whenever there's a stressful event, junk food orders massively go up. After 9/11, there was a huge increase in people ordering pizzas and fried chicken. The night Trump won the election, in blue states on Uber Eats and the other kind of delivery apps, there was a massive increase in people ordering tacos, shitty food, right? If you're a man and you lose your job, your chances of gaining weight massively increase, partly because it's so upsetting and you eat to comfort yourself. And one of the things that happens when you take these drugs is your ability to comfort eat is taken away from you. You can't comfort eat. And we've got a good analogy, I think, or a good precedent for helping us think about how that affects you. So the best comparison for these drugs, if we're trying to figure out their effects, I think is bariatric surgery, right? So up to now, it was very hard to sustainably lose like more than 20% of your body weight. The only way it was possible to do it very quickly was bariatric surgery. So I think we have to look at the outcomes. That's stomach stapling. There's 4 different kinds of it. But it's basically what we think of as stomach stapling. Stomach
Gastric
operations.
band.
Exactly. That's one form of it, right?
Okay.
And so I think you have to look at the evidence from gastric surgery. And in some ways, it's very encouraging. So we know that gastric band surgery and other forms of gastric surgery massively boost your health. If you have one of these operations, over the next 7 years, you are 56% less likely to die of a heart attack, 60% less likely to die of cancer, and 92% less likely to die of diabetes-related causes. In fact, it's so good for your health that you are 40% less likely to die of any cause over the next 7 years, right? So we know reversing obesity massively boosts physical health in most cases, right? Sometimes very dramatically. But we also know from bariatric surgery, there's plenty of downsides to bariatric surgery. It's a horrendous operation, and 1 in 1,000 people die during the operation. It's grim. But we also know, where I think it's really important to the thing you're asking about, is that it has an effect on your psychology. So a lot of people are much happier. Most people who have that surgery are glad. But 17% of people who have that surgery have to have inpatient psychiatric treatment afterwards because they're so depressed or distressed. Your chances of committing suicide almost quadruple after you've had bariatric surgery. And I think there's lots of reasons why. Some of it must be the grimness of the operation and the aftermath. But I think a lot of it is, you take away comfort eating from people, right? If you go through life, and especially people who've had gastric band surgery or the other surgeries, those are people who were very severely obese, so they will have had this effect very powerfully in their lives, most of them. If you take away something that is a key way of soothing people, when that goes well, you can rebuild your life, you can find other ways to get that soothing, and that's really valuable and important. But a lot of people just experience it as profoundly painful and distressing. And I interviewed a lot of people like that.
If you love the Diary of a CEO brand and you watch this channel, please do me a huge favor. Become part of the 15% of the viewers on this channel that have hit the subscribe button. It helps us tremendously, and the bigger the channel gets, the bigger the guests.